The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. The apostles gathered together with Jesus and reported all they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." People were coming and going in great numbers, and they had no opportunity even to eat. So they went off in the boat by themselves to a deserted place. People saw them leaving, and many came to know about it. They hastened there on foot from all the towns and arrived at the place before them. When they disembarked and saw the vast crowd, his heart was moved with pity for them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. The Gospel of the Lord. You may not know that the leading cleric in the Catholic Church in the United States is a priest by the name of Cardinal Timothy Dolan. He happens to be the Cardinal Archbishop of the Archdiocese of New York, one of the larger dioceses in the country. He's a very intelligent guy, but a very funny guy as well, and he has his own blog that he reports on, usually weekly. And the heading of his blog this week read as follows: "New York is mission territory." And then he went on to put in the blog that in an important sense, every diocese is always missionary territory. If you remember, the missionary who was with us about a month ago, who did missionary work in Africa, told us that we are all missionaries as well. However, Cardinal Dolan went on to say that New York has become mission territory in another sense because of a societal crisis of faith. Noting that Archbishop Charles Chaput has spoken of the need to re-evangelize the neighboring Archdiocese of Philadelphia that he leads, the Cardinal said that the same need is evident in New York. "Maybe we have gotten way too smug," Cardinal Dolan wrote. "We have taken our Catholic faith for granted." He suggested that Catholics have come to rely on physical plant, entrenched programs, and social clout, rather than recognizing the constant need to proclaim the gospel message. Do I think that Cardinal Dolan is right on? Absolutely, he's right on. For those of you who were here last week, I gave several reasons as to why there is a crisis of faith, and atheism is on a significant rise here in the United States. And that brings us to our gospel today, a passage once again from Mark chapter 6. We find it echoed in Luke chapter 9 in more extensive detail. Luke tends to do that with the stories that he's inherited from Mark. But Mark simply tells us today about what happened when the 12 apostles who Jesus sent off on mission come back. They report to Jesus about everything that they had seen and everything that they had taught. And then obviously it's a positive report. And so Jesus takes them off to the side for a little bit of spiritual rest. But they can't get away. Why? Because the crowds are coming after them. They even cross the lake, thinking if we go over there, we can get away from them. And guess what happens? The crowds come after them again. Everybody wants a piece of Jesus. They want to see him. They want to hear him. They want to touch him. And the Lord's response? He pities them all. Why? Because he says they are like sheep without a shepherd. That's a power-packed phrase, because actually it harkens back to the Old Testament. In the book of the prophet Ezekiel, chapter 34, God is speaking to the prophet Ezekiel, and he is lashing out at the shepherds of the people, namely the kings. He says, "I entrusted my people to you, and you've led them astray. I'm going to get rid of the bad shepherds," says Ezekiel, and I myself, says God, will once again shepherd my people. What was the problem with the shepherds of Jesus' day? To whom is Jesus referring? He's referring to the scribes and the Pharisees, the rabbis, if you will. And what was the problem with the rabbis, the scribes and the Pharisees? Well, the people simply were not getting nourished with what they needed. They want what all of us want. The reason you're here today at this Mass, we want to get to heaven someday. The people back then wanted the same thing. But they were getting all kinds of confusion from the rabbis. See, first of all, to become a student of a rabbi, you had to know somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. Secondly, you had to be able to read and write. Majority of people could not read nor write. So that cut you out. And then there was the problem, though, while most of the rabbis followed the commandments and the law, some put different twists on the topics. And so you might study with one rabbi on one point and get another opinion from another rabbi on another point. But the bottom line, the majority of people, the poor people of the land, the farmers, the shepherds, weren't getting any nourishment from their leaders. And so that's why when Jesus comes on the scene and talks about one commandment, love one another as I have loved you, his message was definitely appealing to them all. So they wanted him. They wanted to learn from him. They wanted to experience what he had to offer. And Jesus gave it to them. And not just teaching, he would give them his very life. He knew how to take care of his sheep, and he did. So, what does this have to do with our own country? Cardinal Dolan is exactly right. America has once again become missionary territory. Atheism is on the rise, and Catholics know about a thimbleful about their faith across the board in the United States. And how do we know this? Plenty of studies, but the one that was most revealing to me came out in 1993. It was done by the Gallup poll people. And here's what they discovered on one key topic. The question was, what do Catholics believe about the Eucharist? And what was revealing and shocking, only 33% of Catholics in America believe what the church teaches about the Eucharist. Only 33% believe that Christ is present in this Eucharist. Bread and wine are no longer bread and wine. They are the body and blood of Christ. Only 33% believe what the church teaches. Shocking to you? It's not shocking to me. I see it in people's body language for years when they come up to receive the Eucharist. And so you ask yourself the question, how did it get that way? How did we get to that point? It was a slow-moving erosion that happened in the church. And it happened at many levels. But primarily we have to hold responsible the sisters, the priests, the religious brothers, the deacons, and even some bishops who did not do a good job of shepherding the flock, of teaching the people. For instance, when I was in the seminary in Baltimore, we had Mass every day in a chapel in which you could put 10 Fatimas in this chapel. It was huge. And I never forget, every time we went in for Mass, and Mass was always at 11 o'clock, you entered the front of the chapel, and it was a gorgeous, gorgeous building. You went in and there was a little plate where you would put your communion bread in the plate using a little tong. They used what we call in Catholic circles substantial bread, which is actually permitted by the Catholic Church. Substantial bread is the real fresh bread. The formula for making substantial bread is very simple. There are 2 ingredients and 2 ingredients only: flour and water. No leavening, no flavoring, nothing is allowed to be used. And some people can take just flour and water and do amazing things with it. I can't, but I know people who can. Guess what? They didn't use that formula. What they had resembled an oatmeal cookie, and I love oatmeal cookies. Leanne Imperi will tell you, sugar-free, she makes the best on the planet. But it resembled an oatmeal cookie, and it was sweetened with molasses. And that was out there for us for communion every day, unless and except when a bishop came to the chapel to do Mass. If a bishop came, the little wafers appeared all of a sudden. Isn't that interesting? That's how they were teaching us to become Catholic priests, to be dishonest and to lie. That was wrong. And that was going on in many places. This past week, there was an interesting story that broke over national public radio. No, you did not hear it in the mainstream media. For the past couple years, a group of religious sisters in the United States have been investigated by the Vatican. The Vatican has received many complaints about the fact that they were imparting teachings that went contrary to the gospel, contrary to what the Catholic Church teaches. This organization is known as the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, the LCWR. Well, what happened was the Vatican called them on the carpet, and they're asking that they do some explaining about their teachings. Well, an interview was granted by the president of this organization, a Sister Pat Farrell. And so the interviewer asked her several things about what they believed in all this, but listen to what she says with regard to abortion. Sister Farrell avoided taking any clear stand, saying that the leadership conference is pro-life, but defines the issue broadly. And here's a quote from Sister. If the rights of the unborn trump all of the rights of all of those who are already born, that is a distortion. That is a distortion. To put that in pure and simple terms, Sister is pro-abortion. Pro-abortion. A Catholic sister is pro-abortion. Can you believe that? And I never dreamed I would be standing up here and saying that to you. She's pro-abortion, pure and simple. So you have people like that teaching the faith for many, many years. No wonder people are confused. No wonder people do not understand their Catholic faith. Secondly, materialism has just permeated our society. And that in and of itself is dangerous to our society. What's going on? Well, this past week in Newsweek magazine, there was a story about the God particle. I'm sure you all have seen the news stories about the God particle, the most recent discovery in physics. Well, a physicist was interviewed by Newsweek, and he said that it really is inappropriate to use the word God to discuss this particle. Call it by its real name, the Higgs boson particle. He said, and with this discovery, God is now irrelevant. For all you people who have this daydreaming thing about God and a supreme being, we're beyond that. We know better than that. We can prove through science that God doesn't exist. And that's the reason why I canceled my subscription to Newsweek 12 years ago. Can you believe that? Yeah, it's out there. Aurora, Colorado. Did you ever in your life think that that would happen on American soil? What a tragedy. People go to the movie to have fun, to escape. You know, I love going to movies. I hardly ever get to go, but I love them. It's a great escape. You go in there to be around people, to have fun, to be entertained. Who would have thought that a 24-year-old would have come in a-blasting? He squeezed off over 100 rounds at the least. People were slaughtered. 12 died inside the theater. Almost 70 were wounded. And those who survived it are scarred for life psychologically. You don't get over a trauma like that. That's a form of post-traumatic stress that sticks with you. It's horrible. Who would ever think that something like that would have happened? Believe it or not, the highest rate of suicide in teenagers in the United States now is among affluent kids. Kids whose parents fall in the upper middle class to upper class economic group. Someone said to me in a group recently, he said, I can't understand how that could be so. These kids have the means to get whatever they want in this life. And that's the problem. They are, as I told this group, drowning in a sea of plenty. They have everything they want materially, but they have no intimate relationship with their parents. They're killing themselves. They're the highest rate of suicide among teens. And I don't know if you saw Time magazine this week, a very, very sad cover. The title on the cover was very simple, one a day, one a day. And they weren't talking about the vitamins. On average, one military person a day returning from Afghanistan kills himself or herself. One a day. More people coming back from Afghanistan have died from suicide than the number of people who died serving the country in Afghanistan. What's going on? You know, people went through World War II. The suicide rate was minimal. World War I, the same. Even Vietnam, there was a higher rate of suicide after that war, but nothing like what we're seeing today. More people dead than actually died in combat in Afghanistan. What's going on? My brothers and sisters, it's rooted in materialism, believe it or not. So what are we supposed to do? Run for the hills? Say, let me find myself an island and buy it and live on there and get away from everybody? You can't do that. There's no island far enough. We got to work from within. And that's why tomorrow, July 23rd, is a most important date for us here in Huntington and for the United States. Tomorrow we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the coming to the United States of the Palatine sisters, the sisters who are here in Huntington. It's most important for me because I owe my vocation to the priesthood to these sisters. They taught me, they inspired me to become a Catholic priest, and I make no bones about it. They were responsible for that. What was the big deal about the Palatines? Well, you actually have to go back to the year 1795 in Italy, in Rome, in fact, when a man by the name of Vincent Pallotti was born to a family of nobles. At the age of 16, he had a burning desire to become a Catholic priest. At 16, for goodness sake. And so he got his desires, and he became a Catholic priest. Vincent had an incredible attitude about faith in God. Because you see, the Western Europe in which he was born and lived most of his life was different from the Western Europe before him. First of all, Western Europe was dealing with a heresy called Jansenism. Jansenism is almost identical to biblical fundamentalism around here, except it's in the Catholic Church. They basically teach that all of us, the Jansenists taught, are so tainted by sin that we're destined for hell, and only by the grace of God could any of us possibly be saved. The church condemned Jansenism soundly back in the 18th century. But the message of Jansenism was still in circulation. Secondly, the Enlightenment was full-blown. The Enlightenment, which gave us the scientific method, pure and simple, among other things. But what happened, unfortunately, by the time the 18th century comes around, is people began to substitute science for faith. And that's where we are today in this country. And so what did Vincent do that was different? He read Paul's letters, and especially the first letter of Timothy, chapter 2, verse 4, where it is written, "It pleases God that all people might be saved." Or in other words, St. Vincent de Paul had this belief that everybody, Jew, Gentile, and all in between, every species of person, is a child of God, and God wants them all to be saved. That was unique for his day. And so he developed a motto based on his prayer life. The Latin Caritas Christi urging nos translates, "The love of Christ impels us." He would found a group of sisters and brothers and priests known as the Palatines. They are formerly known as the Society of the Catholic Apostolate. And on July 23rd, 1912, the first group of sisters from Germany, who were Palatines, hit the shores of the United States of America. And where did they go? Well, first they started out in the ghettos of the big cities on the East Coast. And then they made their way to Huntington, West Virginia. Huntington, West Virginia. I was taught by the Palatines. They were amazing women of faith, but their attitude was to love other people, irregardless of who they were. They loved them all. Oh, the people back in Logan, when they made it to Logan, thought they were witches and warlocks. You know, they couldn't believe these people. You know, what kind of whacked out person walks around wearing a long black dress in the middle of the summer? It doesn't make any sense. That is until the sisters walked up and down those hollers, taking clothes and boxes of food to poor people. Poor Baptists, poor Methodists, poor atheists, poor Jews, poor anybody. They didn't care because the love of Christ impelled them to do so. And then they came here to Huntington, and they put together a hospital called St. Mary's. And yes, it's known as a Catholic hospital, but guess what? If you were to do a study, you would find out the majority of the people who received care at St. Mary's were not Catholic. Not Catholic at all. But the sisters loved them anyway. And so it's important that we celebrate this milestone of 100 years. The love of Christ impelled these sisters to walk up and down the hollers. And you know the amazing thing about the Palatines that I remember very clearly? They loved their Catholic Church, and they were faithful to the Church's teaching. Always, always, they were faithful teachers. So my brothers and sisters, we have the answer. The answer to what question? What are we going to do to change our country? What are we going to do to change our church here in the United States? People are hungering for something. The problem is they're looking in all the wrong places. They're looking at drugs. They're looking at material things. They're looking at the occult. They're looking at a lot of stuff. And they're not satisfied. They need the gospel, as Timothy Dolan said so well. So my brothers and sisters, we can no longer depend upon the Palatine sisters to do it for us. Most of them are elderly and infirm. But they taught us what to do. Their motto, "The love of Christ impels us," needs to be our motto. It needs to be the way we live our Catholic faith, so that people can see who we are out there. They can hear the way we live and watch the way we believe. And guess what? In time, they'll want to join us. So please, please, pray for our country. Pray for the sisters, but pray for all of us. May we wake up and realize if we don't witness to Christ, then it just ain't going to happen here in Huntington.